I write for the theater. I write music and lyrics. And today's a great day because I'm in Steve Sondheim's garden. And I get to ask Steve all about his work today. And I've got many questions that I've wanted to ask probably my whole life. Steve always loomed very large for me as a writer. By the age of 14, I was about ready to play him some stuff, and I arranged through my mother, with whom Steve was a very close friend, to play him my first batch of music, and expected a shower of compliments. Was hoping for that from Steve, who was my absolute idol, and in many ways still is. And I came away from that experience sort of crestfallen because I didn't get what I wanted, which was unmitigated compliments. I think I wrote him a letter which may have been grateful but passive-aggressive. And he wrote me a letter in response. Dear Adam, thanks for the letter. But I didn't mean to be, quote, not very encouraging. In fact, I hoped I was being quite the reverse. For me, true encouragement consists not so much of burbling as of detailed attention. In any event, be assured I think you're serious, literate, intelligent, and talented. And surprisingly, the last is the least because it means little without the others. Just keep writing, as we all do, or should. With love, Steve. And I wanted to read this because this is a perfect frame for how Steve has treated me my whole life and how I think he really is as a human being, which is unfailingly honest and extraordinarily kind. He doesn't pull his punches, but he doesn't confuse honesty and anger. He's a good man as well as being a genius, and I look forward to talking to him today. I hope we all learn something.
Hi, Adam.
Hey there.
Hi, come on, sit down.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, and you too.
And that's Addie?
No, this is Willie, and that's Addie.
They have very topiary tails.
Yes, well, they are topiary dogs. That's what poodles do for a living. Okay, enough. Enough. Okay, out of camera range. Don't give me that. Don't give me that look. I can't stand it. Okay.
My first memory of you, I think I was maybe 3 or 4, and it was during one of the parties, the Christmas parties that my parents used to have. My mom, Mary Rogers, and you knew each other from, God, the age of 15 or 16?
Right, yeah. Well, I think we should say that it's Dick Rogers' daughter. Mary was an apprentice at Westport Country Playhouse when I was. That's when we got to know each other, when we were 20. Hal Prince claims that we met each other, he and I, because he was Mary's date, at the opening of South Pacific, which was when I was 17, Hal was 19, and your mother was 16. And that is certainly possibly true. I don't remember that, but it's certainly possibly true. And but I got to know your mother when we were apprentices at Westport in 1950.
How long have you been here in this house?
1960. This is the house that Gypsy built. Actually, what I'd done was I was trying to find a duplex. There were no such thing as lofts in those days. And so you were constantly getting, or I was anyway, complaints from the neighbors about playing late at night. And I used to write late at night. And I was in a 1.5 room up at 80th Street in a brownstone. And after 10 o'clock at night, pounding on the ceiling. So I thought I ought to get a duplex. And if I could find, because I was starting to earn money. And I couldn't find one. So I got a house instead. And went into debt for a while, and a mortgage and all that sort of thing.
When you first saw this place, did it feel like a place you could write?
Immediately. Our friend Bert Shevelov, the well-known lyric writer and the guy who wrote Forum, and is your godfather?
He's my brother's godfather.
Yeah, okay. And he said, if you're going to get a place, that just go into a place, and if it speaks to you, then ask the price. Don't ask the price first, because then you'll start to say, well, I can sort of afford it even though it isn't exactly what I want.
Right.
He said,
Don't
I came to this place right away. I loved it. I was the first person to see it, so I got it at a very good price. And the great thing about it is there's a community gardens in the back. It's the only one left in Manhattan, I think, or one of 2, which are 20 gardens made into one
Yeah, it's
huge
incredible.
garden, and it's really very pretty.
Have you written anything out there, lyric-wise?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
I used to hang out on the terrace and write. Yep, I did. I wrote most of Sunday up there.
Wow.
The lyric of Sunday.
Oh, good. I've got
Yeah,
a
yeah.
fun question about that
Okay,
for later.
okay.
Where did you grow up?
In the middle of Manhattan. I have plotted the northernmost, easternmost, westernmost, and southernmost places I've lived in the city, and drawn them on a map. And if you cut out Central Park, I've lived my entire life in 20 square blocks. Want to talk about parochial? It's unbelievable. It's smaller than Agatha Christie Village. It is tiny, what I've lived in. I come from an upper middle class family, so it all revolves around below 82nd Street and to 49th Street.
It's interesting that it's been so condensed in the sense of the range of your mind. One wonders
Well,
if there's kind
it's
of
also the range of influences. I mean, for example, when you moved to your loft, even though it's in Manhattan, it's a whole other village, as we know, no pun intended. It's a whole other atmosphere.
Yes.
I've always been in this one atmosphere.
There was some Bucks County in there.
Oh, well, what happened was when my parents got divorced, my mother got a house in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is where I met the Hammersteins. And that was just during the summers. And not very many of them, because I left my mother to live with my father when I was 16. And he had a summer house in Stamford, Connecticut. So my summers were spent in between Bucks County or Doylestown.
And Oscar just happened to be a close neighbor.
Well, yeah, he was 3 miles away, but there was more to it than that. My mother was a celebrity collector, and she knew the Hammersteins briefly. And also, she was a working woman, and she needed to get me off her hands when they got divorced. And so Jimmy Hammerstein, Oscar's youngest son, was my age, year difference. And so we became friends, and that's how that. And I think my mother decided to move to Bucks County because of the Hammersteins, and there were other celebrities in the neighborhood, though she didn't hang around with them. And so that's what happened. I gradually osmosed into the Hammerstein household over a period of 5 years.
Were they encouraging as your interest in music began to grow about music?
Not particularly. No, I just wanted to imitate Oscar. I just wanted to do what he did. I'd taken, I think you know this, I'd taken piano lessons when I was 6 and 7 years old, and done my, the nice Jewish boy on the West Side gives the recitals at the piano teacher's house. And then I wasn't interested in it very much. And my interest got renewed when, not so much in the piano, but in songs or in music, when I met Oscar and just wanted to be what he wanted. Whatever he was is what I wanted to be. He was a surrogate father. I got along fine with my father. I liked him a lot, but I didn't see him very much because he had very restricted visiting privileges as a result of the divorce.
And so the energy that began to come out of you for the theater and for music was a product as much of Oscar's humanity as his talent.
No, it's a result of what he did for a living. I didn't really appreciate the humanity until, he certainly was. When I say a surrogate father, I was I was closer to the family as a family, because I'm an only child and I had no family, and my father being divorced, and both of them working. And I spent all my time in boarding schools and in summer camps, even before the divorce. So it was a family. I went over there to be part of a family is what happened, really. And they were comforting. I did not get along with my mother, and so they were very comforting to me. So it was really Oscar and Dorothy, his wife, and Jimmy, my best friend. But Oscar then thought, wouldn't it be fun if and he said, would you like to come see a show? And I remember he took, Jimmy and I went to the same school, George School, and he took us out for the opening of Carousel in New Haven, because it was on a spring vacation. And I saw Oklahoma, not the opening, but I saw the opening of South Pacific. But by that time, I was inculcated.
You were in there.
I wanted to be a songwriter.
Yeah.
Then I retook piano lessons then when I was in George School, which was the Quaker school that I went to, prep school. And I took piano lessons there for 2 years and gave recitals. Then I got tired of that.
And by the time you were there, you were already starting to write?
Oh yeah. We wrote a song with two classmates. Wrote a show with two classmates called By George, with a very clever title, I think.
And so the piano had a purpose at this point. It wasn't just the sort of an abstract thing.
Yeah,
to
no,
learn how to do.
I started really writing songs when I was about 14. And yes, the first show was at George School, and then I wrote a few in college.
If Oscar were hovering now, which I assume occasionally he does.
Yeah, I wish he had seen what I did after he died. He never even saw Forum. He died after Gypsy, so he never saw a show that I'd written music for, and I regret that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he would like it or not. This is something you don't know. He was baffled by contemporary music. By contemporary, I mean Stravinsky. I mean, anybody post-romantic, anybody from 1910 on.
Yeah.
Completely baffled him. So I started to open his mind up to it. I started with the Ravel Trio, which you know I love, and then because Ravel was a little hard for him, and
So you seduced him with harmony.
Exactly, you got it, and tunes. And I gradually worked him up. Of course, with Stravinsky, I just gave him Petrushka and Firebird, because again, tunes.
Yeah.
But I eventually got him on to Rite of Spring, and I got him to like this stuff. I opened his ears up to all that sort of stuff.
Did he give you notes on Gypsy or West Side?
Yes, he did. Both. We had a special run-through of West Side just before the Gypsy run-through. I assume that people listening know what a Gypsy run-through is. The run-through for an uninvited audience from the theater.
And invited audience.
Yes.
Not an uninvited.
Uninvited audience. And Oscar was going away, so he couldn't do it. So we ran it for him, and the balcony scene was originally, what they sang on the balcony was One Hand, One Heart, believe it or not, a song of limited passion. And so he said, that you'd really need something that soars there. So what we did was we took the quintet had been written, just before the Rumble, and Tonight is in there. And we decided to take Tonight out of the quintet and make it the basis of the balcony scene, and we expanded a little bit, and then used it as a reprise in the quintet, which worked very nicely. I can remember that specific piece of advice. And then he came down to Philadelphia to see Gypsy, and Arthur and I had a meal with him afterwards. And he said, I think it's wonderful, but there are 3 things that I would suggest you improve. One, and we eagerly listened, thinking about it. The first thing he said was, the doorknob on the kitchen set keeps falling off. That should be fixed. Yes, I thought that what we really need is a smart ass, right, at this point. Because we knew something was not happening right with the show. We knew that. And he said, secondly, the scene where, in the Chinese restaurant, he said, you should end that with You'll Never Get Away From Me. You shouldn't. We had the song in the middle of the scene, and there was dialogue afterwards. He said, generally, it's a good idea to end the scene with a song, particularly that kind of scene, which is comic and romantic, right? And then he said, and he looked at me and he said, you're going to kill me for this, but you have to give a hand to Ethel Merman at the end of Rose's Turn. I had written a high violin harmonic, so that she would end screaming, for me, for me, for me, and you'd hear in the orchestra this, and dead silence, and then in the wings you hear Louise clapping. And he said, you can't do that. He said, you have to put a big ending on it. I said, but she's having a nervous breakdown. You can't put a big, I said, everything you taught me. I got all worked up. He said, yeah, but the problem is there are things that happen in the theater that you got to take into account. And one of them is that the audience is waiting to applaud.
They want to have a chance to.
And to get the tension out. He said they are not listening to the last 4 pages of the play, and those are the most important 4 pages of the play, because that's where Rose becomes the mother and Rose becomes the daughter and Gypsy becomes the mother. And if you give her a hand, they will. And sure enough, we gave her a hand, which is still, as far as I can say, completely false. Well, it's not completely false, because now what Arthur, which we didn't think of at the time, Arthur now has changed the ending so that she gets a hand, but it's in her head, and she's having a fantasy about receiving an ovation. So it really works very nicely. But the audience was dead silent for the last 3 pages, and they really listened, and then...
Well, and
so-
you also accomplished what you wanted harmonically because you had that lovely flat 9 grinding away before the final.
I insisted on that.
Yes.
Julie was not too happy with
Now,
that.
you said just now you had written. So, to what extent were you not to?
No. There are moments in the music of Gypsy that I either sketched out or what I used to do with Julie is I would write out the rhythms and the rise and fall. For example, I remember writing Some People and going, some people can't, because I'd read that Cole Porter used to do that, that he would write, it was just one of those things, with the durations of the notes, but no pitches.
Sort of a Morse
Yeah,
code.
exactly.
Proportional.
And then he would pick his tune. I thought that's really smart, and that's why his words sit so well on the music. And I thought, that's a good thing to do. So I remember when I wrote Some People Dry, and I took the first 8 bars, first section, and sketched them out that way. And then Julie picked the pitches.
Yeah.
And shaped the melody. But I did that a lot with Julie, and he liked that.
I would have to say that almost all of your work feels as if it has been generated using that technique, insofar as it hews very closely to speech, which makes it memorable and contemporary.
I believe in, there are different ways to write songs, and that's, I happen to like conversational songs. Bert Shevlov, who I worked with on Form, said, there are other ways to write songs, but that's the way I like to write them. And it's partly an imitation of Oscar, although Oscar did a lot of, if not melismatic writing, but he would draw out word, who stole my heart away. So he didn't always, there was something more traditional about the songwriting, qua-songwriting that he did.
Was there anything about Oscar that you knew you didn't want to emulate in his work?
Not until I got older. Not until I had my Oedipal moment. It was Oscar himself who said, when I first started to write lyrics, he said, "You're writing like me. You're imitating me. You're talking about nature and things like that. You don't believe in those things." He said, "Write what you believe." And then he said something very telling. He said, "Write what you believe, and you'll be 99% ahead of the game." And I think he may even have said 99% ahead of everybody else. And as soon as he put it in those competitive terms, I thought, right. From that point on, I never used his kind of imagery again. And his kind of imagery often embarrasses me. There's a lot about Oscar's lyrics that I find wet and embarrassing. His ornithological obsession. The fact that there is a bird in every single lyric that he's ever written. If it's not a lark, it's a willow. It's a hummingbird. It's a whip. It just that kind of nature imagery makes me cringe.
Does it feel gratuitous or unhelpful to the furthering of character and so forth?
Yeah. Well, what it is I don't believe that people talk that way. Oscar's lyrics, which sit conversationally, are so full of his kind of imagery that you think that everybody in all of his shows are nature lovers. They all sound alike. They're always talking about willow trees and birds and rivers, and it gives them a sameness and a softness. And what was interesting is when he tried to avoid that, as he did in Me and Juliet, it's completely unconvincing. You listen to the lyrics of Me and Juliet, and you'd swear to God this guy has never been backstage. That's just not the way people in shows, kids in shows talk. Kids meaning performers. It's like, and of course he didn't get to know those people because he was management, and he was. I got to know the performers in shows because when we did West Side Story, I was the same age as the performers.
Yeah. When do you, if you remember a moment like this, think that you recognized in yourself that you had your own voice?
Company, probably. Actually, start with Forum because Forum shows off the smart-ass side of me, and I was the clever side. I recognized that I was being clever in my own way, not in a Cole Porter way, not in a Frank Lesser way, and so that. But I could feel with Company that, and it was partly because of the subject matter. George picked a subject matter that a world that I understood. You know, I understand the world of the ladies who lunch because I grew up in it. So I was completely as opposed to West Side, Gypsy. Those were atmospheres that I had to get into through the librettist. You know. Well, first of all, George Furth always based his characters on real people, and there is a real life model for everybody in company. And I some of them I knew, and some I didn't. But so in a way, we were writing about people he and if I didn't know him, then he would tell me.
That's
about
what it feels like.
Yeah, he would tell me about them.
Have you had that again ever in the same way?
No, not really. Well, yes, in Merrily We Roll Along, the song "Opening Doors." There are really only two consciously autobiographical songs I've ever written. One is a good thing going, not the song itself, but the circumstance of singing at a party, and then everybody says, oh, it's out windows, oh, play it again, and they all start talking while you're playing and drinking and completely ignoring you, having stuck you there at the piano. And that's autobiographical. And then the whole sequence of Opening Doors, which is 2 years, takes place over a period of 2 years in New York, for these two songwriters and this other writer, the girl who's their best friend, is not in specifics, but it's emotionally autobiographical, and its outline of event is Hal Prince and your mother and me. It's very, very much because, you know, your mother was hustling for jobs just the way I was, and Hal already was a successful producer. But we were all, hey, it's showbiz, we couldn't wait, you know, and it's the whole thing of seeing every show and talking about every show and our lives, and then writing and knocking on producers' doors, and all that was really fun and really frenetic, and that number that's the closest to anything I've ever written that's really autobiographical.
On a professional level, you've had long relationships with, and I'm sure there are more, but these are the people who come immediately to mind: Hal Prince, Paul Gemignani,
Yeah.
Jonathan Tunick, James Lapine, to some extent George Furth.
Yeah, these are all collaborators, yeah.
And why did you keep going back to them?
Oh, goodness. Don't you work with the same people over here? You work with Ted Sperling a lot, for example?
Yes,
you?
I mean, I do.
But isn't it because you have a language with him? And
you know, I would say that, and I regret this, and it could be partly my fault, but there isn't as fertile a community for the theater now.
Also, you haven't done as many shows. That's another thing, too.
That's also really true.
Because there was a period there where we were turning out a show a year, you know, a show every 2 years. And it's because A, they're the best in their professions, and B, you're working with people that you feel comfortable with. I mean, it was a real wrench, but a wonderful one. My life changed when I started working with Lapine, because for the first time I was working with a whole other generation. I was working with, you know, a little older than you and a lot younger than me, and you know, and James represented a whole new way of looking at the theater and a whole way of playwriting that was nowhere near as conservative as what I had come from, as my background. But then over a period of time, of course, I loved working with him and got used to working with him. But otherwise, it really has to do with people who have similar tastes. I suppose you could make out a case that in a way it stultifies you. I don't think it stultified me, but maybe there's a case. Maybe I would have turned out more interesting or even more work if I'd worked with different people all the way along. I can't tell. But you know, it's just getting in a room with John Weidman or with Lapine. Right away, I want to write. You know, I don't have to suss them out. I don't have to, and certainly never have to censor myself. You know, I don't mind saying stupid things in front of them.
Would you describe the shift to Lapine and Weidman as, in a way, a break from a certain linearity that you had learned from Oscar that you were steeped
Yes,
in?
well, certainly with Lapine, absolutely, because Lapine's generation of playwrights, you know, well, it actually started in the '60s with that whole group of playwrights of let's say John Guare and his colleagues at the time, Leonard Melfi and Lanford Wilson, a lot of people. And certainly Albee. They were bending the rules, so to speak. It was a whole new way of thinking. Although I've always been, as you know, attracted to experimental storytelling ever since I was 17, and Oscar made me a gopher on Allegro, because Allegro was a real attempt to do exactly what happened it's quite prophetic, what happened in the 60s, which is find a way of utilizing, minimal scenery and letting the audience's imagination work, and the epic idea, just the way our town takes place over a period of years and shows growing up, and so that's what.
Do you feel that that's as effective?
Yeah. Oh, much first of all, yeah. I think anything that engages the audience's imagination is certainly that's the way I feel as a theater goer. I mean, I love naturalistic theater, but in musicals I want things to be completely surprising. Peter Schaffer, I remember I went to a play once with him, and there were 2 rapes, a fire, a murder, I think some incest, I can't remember. And at the end of the first, and that's all my kind of stuff. And at the end of the first act, I said, "Why am I so bored?" I said, "Is it the writing?" He said, "No." He said, "There's no surprise." And I thought, oh, I get it. And surprise is the element of the theater that I like the best, and of movies too. But the theater is more full of surprises because you can do so much with just, as I say, turning on a light and suddenly there's a person over there.
What's the most satisfying surprise you've ever had a hand in?
Oh, had a hand in
your work?
Oh, the change in the Follies at the climax of Follies, when you've been sitting there in an hour and a half of gloomy Boris Aronson rubble, and suddenly in a most magical 45 seconds, the stage is transformed jaw-droppingly into the most beautiful, elaborate wedding cake extravaganza. With to this day, I think of that moment. That's what the theater's about. That's worth the price of admission.
Let's just circle back for 1 second, for one more thing to the early part of your growth. What did you listen to 1 million times when you were 14?
Gosh, it wasn't so. I listened to concert music. If I listened to songs, no. What I did was I would buy the sheet music of the new shows and play them over. I don't think I listened to any song over and over again. There were certain composers I was drawn to, but I think the pieces of music I listened to were the post-romantic, the Ravel particularly, virtually everything he wrote, and a lot of Stravinsky, and when I got to know him, Benjamin Britten, the instrumental pieces, not the operas, because I'm not an opera fan. Rachmaninoff, Rachmaninoff over and over again.
The most crunchy romantic.
Have you ever been invited to Desert Island Discs? You probably haven't been in England long enough. It's fun, but you get 8 records that you're allowed to take to the Desert Island, and it's very interesting. If you were asked to do that, and now you have to commit yourself. Now it can be any kind of music. Yeah. It can be a score of a show. It can be a single piano piece. It can be anything. But you got to pick the 8 pieces.
And you've done this.
Oh yeah, I've done it twice.
What were your last 8?
Gosh, it's about 15 years ago. It's always Porgy and Bess is always there, and it's always the Brahms Second Piano Concerto, and there's always a Rachmaninoff piece. There's always a Ravel piece. Oh, the Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini, and probably the Ravel Left-Hand Piano Concerto. That's because I'm a big piano concerto fan, and I wrote my junior thesis on the Ravel Left-Hand. What about you, just off the top of your head, if you had to pick some, you don't have to pick 8.
Well, Stevie Wonder's Inner Vision.
Oh my God, don't even know it.
It's a wonderful record. There would be a number of Ravel things, like... Yeah. I think Stravinsky's also on the list. L'Histoire de Soldat would be on the list. Firebird, certainly, because it's so extraordinarily beautiful. Which brings me to something about phrasing, but I know I'm supposed to answer the rest of this. I don't want you to be demure, but I have to say Sweeney Todd would be there, and company.
Wow. Well, good, thanks.
I think
compliment.
There was something I heard on a subway once when I was in Paris when I was 16. This guy came onto the subway playing a clarinet. And not in a way that you kind of went, oh, God. It was just enchanting. It was about 3 in.the morning, and he came on the subway and started playing something that had something of you in it, actually, but it was... And then it did...
Really?
It did that.
I wonder
I may have conflated it in my mind, but I remember him jumping from seat to seat
He may have been ad-libbing.
He might have been.
Yeah, may have been not a
He may have
confident
known I
man.
was a fan.
Oh.
Who knows? When you know what a song, where a song is meant to be and what it's meant to do, does that mean that you already have a purchase on how to approach it? Does it coalesce
Yeah,
slowly?
Almost always. Oh, but that in a dialogue with the book writer, which is where all these things come up, if I get an idea, it's because I have a real idea. It's that thing. I'm sure you get it too, where you actually see the whole thing, but you don't see any of the details. It's just you know what it's going to be. You know what it's going to feel like. You sort of know where it's going to begin and end. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you just start with a thread and you have to work it out. I don't know how much you talk with your book writer before you write. I talk extensively. I mean, really extensively, and first of all, wanting to get to know what the characters are like, and secondly, how songs can help the show as opposed to hinder it, because that's the hard part. Is you really have to. It's always elusive. Should this be a musical or not, or should it be a play? You know.
Well, I often do, I guess, a rubbing. When people put paper over a tombstone, I sort of do a rubbing over the story and see where the heat is, where things feel like they should be
songs. The bas relief. Yes, I know. Yes, you can do that. But then don't you discuss the particular? You say, listen, I have a feeling that this scene, when she sees him the first time, that there should be a song there. I don't know whether it's his or hers, but there should. Maybe it's a duet.
Yes.
I mean, and then by talking to the book writer, say, well, the book writer will say, well, the impulse in the scene. You see, I think he should discover about her, but not till later. Yeah, blah blah blah. You know.
Do you have a feeling in your gut, just an emotional signature about a song, about a situation and a character in a situation that happens first?
No, usually, well, my instinct to answer that is no, that what occurs first is the tone of the song. And that has to do with everything from comic tone to whether it's going to be terse, or whether it's going to be verbose, or whether it's going to be hysterical, or whether it's going to be fast or slow. And I think it's because I don't have to think long about what the emotion is going to be once you spot it. It's, as you say, if you take the rubbing and something comes out at you, it's because what would come out at me is the emotional core of it. Now, how do you treat that emotional core? You know.
So does that lead to sitting at the piano, improvising in concert, or in the context of that emotional sense of it?
Yes. Quite often, what will happen is I will let ask the book writer to write into the scene, or maybe even the whole scene first. Or if I know, for example, the first song in Southern Part with George, we knew that we wanted to introduce the relationship between Dot and George, and since the scene was that she was posing for him, it became clear that either he was going to sing an internal monologue, or that she was going to sing an internal monologue, and it seemed to be her moment, because he should be concentrating entirely. He shouldn't be having thoughts about, oh, this is what I think about her. He's trying to say that line, And so knowing that it was going to be her, then what determines the song is the fact that it's July, or it's a hot day, and she's in a heavy dress. And right away, you've got half your song written, because the situation is so specific. Then, knowing that she's in a heavy dress on a hot day, you know she's going to be ill-tempered. And if you know she's going to be ill-tempered, right away, so it all channels right away. And since we didn't want her to be just a fetch, she's got to have a sense of humor about it. So, knowing all this, I said to James, can you write a monologue about this? And that's what he did. And then I took the monologue and changed it into a song. But it came back. But that's exactly the way I would approach it. So if you're 80% ahead of the game, as you know, if you have a situation that is juicy enough to sing about, as opposed to just two people meeting, And so generally, I go for those moments and often ask them, since they are specific moments, the librettist can write that moment, because it's very specific, and it's part of the scene anyway. So I always try to get the librettist to do the hard work.
There's something that I've often used when I teach that I think is attributed to Johnny Mercer. He was asked, what's the most important thing about a song? Johnny Mercer happens to be one of my favorite people of all time. And he said, the title. And the interviewer said, you mean it has to have a catchy title? And he says, well, yes, but the title is often the bicycle of the song. And the guy said, what's that? And he said, it's the inciting idea, it's the idea that generates the rest of the song. I can think of, so many examples from your work where it feels as if a song has been generated that way.
I suppose I feel that. It feels slightly different, which is that the title is the summation of what you want to say. And it is often useful to start with a pithy, with the essence of the song in a phrase or even a word. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes, particularly with the more discursive songs, you find yourself writing and then you'll hit on a line and say, ah, and that will be, what you decide as a refrain line. I'm trying to think of examples from my own stuff. Look, I'm walking down the street with Arthur. We're trying to think of what Ethel Merman, the character of Rose, should sing for her first song. When she's in the kitchen with her father and she's yelling at him and trying to get money from him. And I was having a lot of trouble. I remember we were walking down between 57th, 56th Street on Park Avenue, having left Julie Stein's apartment. And I was talking, he said, well, what she's saying is that some people can, I said, I'll talk to you later.
Some people.
He did not finish the sentence. He just said, some people can, and I thought, some people.
Sorry, Grateful might be an example of a bicycle.
That comes from a conversation with your mother. Since I'd never been married and I'd never lived with anybody, I got your mother down here, who was just having embarked on her second marriage. And I took out a yellow pad and I said, tell me everything you know about marriage. And we sat in this room. And 2 hours later, I had most of the score of Company written. In the sense that she told me everything. And I remember somehow in that, I remember writing the phrase, sorry, grateful. I don't think it came out of her mouth, but she was describing, the obvious things, the difficulties and the combination of loneliness and non-loneliness and all that. And, that was a distillation of her experience.
Yeah. Having just gotten married myself, I should probably have that conversation with him.
Oh, it's still a little too soon. Don't forget, she was on her second marriage. That was very important.
Yeah.
She had a way of contrasting. She two different guys, two different tones, two different everythings.
You mostly write at the piano?
I try not to. I do write at the piano, but as the years have gone by, I've tried to stay away from the piano more because you get limited by your own technique.
Muscle memory.
Yeah. And what I will do, and I wonder if you do the same thing, is I'll deliberately play in a key that I haven't written in a long time. Particularly the sharp keys, as we all know for some reason are so much harder than the flat keys.
I always write in sharp keys.
Oh, you do? Oh, God.
But it's because it's easier for my fingers. I get ninth-itis and tenth-itis.
That's very interesting because flat keys are much easier. I have a little pig hand, so that may have to do with the size of your hands. I can't do walking tenths. I just can't do it.
Well,
hello.
At least I exceed you in some way.
Look at that.
There we go.
I've trouble. The piano I work on, incidentally, was a result of knowing Leonard Bernstein from West Side Story. He had given children's concerts on this piano, I think 7 times. And then he decided he needed a larger piano. This is not a 9-footer.
This is Steinway?
No, it's Baldwin.
A Baldwin.
He was a Baldwin man, and he was signed to Baldwin. And he said, because I couldn't afford a grand piano, he said, I'll get you one at cost. And he said, you can pay for it in installments. And
can we see it?
Sure. It's his.
All right. So this is the famous
This is the
famous
piano.
instrument.
Yeah, this is the piano that Lenny got for me after he had used it 7 times for children's concerts.
A great Baldwin is a great piano.
Well, what's great is it's mellow. When I got a huge prize of money about 20 years ago, and I thought I'll get a Steinway, and I went down to the Steinway place, and I'm not picky about pianos, but there was one piano that I thought sounded better than the others, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Sondheim, your taste is so terrific. This is the only Hamburg Steinway in the place." So I got to the country, put it in the room, and I started playing, and it started to scream at me.
Yeah, bright.
Nobody had told me,
Brilliant,
and I
bright.
had to send it back,
Especially
and
Opera.
lose me.
Yeah. Well, Baldwins are darker, but this is a very beautiful Baldwin.
Well, it's just nice and mellow, and I can pound on it.
Yeah, a real composer's action too. When you almost have to.
Yep.
lean
God,
in there.
I didn't know you played that many different kinds of piano. There's some funny things. That was drawn by Larry Gelbart, who just died last week, and that's me at the piano, which I think is just terrific. And that is odd. That is something he drew. It prophesied Zero Mostel's curtain call in Forum. He sat on a bench just that way. But Larry drew that 2 years before. And then these are from Lenny. These are the music manuscripts. Lenny used to just send vignettes, I guess you would call them. That's an Avedon photograph there that with the jigsaw puzzle was done for a magazine.
So what's on your music rack right now?
There are things that I promised I would proof that other people have written that are variations on stuff I've written. And then I've got the Leonard Bernstein 13 anniversaries, of which I am one, which I didn't have a copy of, so I just got that. And then there's a sketch of something I was writing about 6 months ago and abandoned, but it's still there to remind me to keep writing.
When you write things down, you write by hand.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't get.
Oh, no, I don't. Oh, I haven't learned the programs. No, I haven't learned the program. But I have a copyist, so I hand her the handwritten manuscripts, and then she translates them.
Is it simply a matter of not wanting to learn the software, or is it is it about process?
No, it's both. I actually sometimes write at the computer a little bit, but mostly I write by hand.
And why would you write at the computer as opposed to this? What would be the advantage?
Oh, I'm not talking about the music. I meant lyrics. Lyrics I sometimes write.
Oh, I see.
No, I never write anything at the computer. No, I don't want to learn. It's a long process to learn something like Finale, and I think this is in a certain way quicker. Mm-hmm. And
yes.
If I didn't have a copyist, then of course
right.
I think I would.
I also think in the same way that we talked about muscle memory and sort of going where your hands want to go instead of where your theatrical mind wants to go, a computer can be the same way. It can sort of lead you into the same grooves.
Well, that's
the same sorts of things.
Do you write at the Finale? You write at the computer?
I write mostly the piano, the guitar, the bass.
But I mean, you notate with your hand.
I don't do that either. I actually notate into the computer, but not until I've got something that's worth notating.
And why is that easier or more?
I can't. I have the worst sort of musical penmanship.
But you could afford a copyist, particularly if you're doing a show. The producer pays for a
I
copyist.
never did it for long enough. Computers came along early enough for me that I never got that quick. I used to look at my mother's manuscripts or my grandfather's and see that they had this wonderful way of making notes that were just a slash and a stem, a slash and a stem.
I don't do that. I must say, I actually write the notes.
Yeah, you got a nice round thing going there.
Sometimes it's not as neat as it could be, but it's
legible.
That's pretty. No, that's my German ancestry.
Do you keep awards around, or did they spook
those? Yes, those are the pretty awards I've got. The reason they're there is I think they're all nice-looking objects. The others are in closets someplace. Right. Want to sit down?
Yeah, let's sit. We've got marks.
Yes, I noticed.
At this stage of your career, with all the success you've had, does that make you impregnable to the kind of fear that would keep you standing still?
Oh, you get less confident as you get older. I'm sure you've heard this before. It's just the more you know, the more you're frightened. And also, when you build up a reputation and people are expecting things from you,
yes.
And you know that yourself, the expectations make you very hesitant about doing anything else. And and also, at my age, the energy level is going, and I mean, the balloon is collapsing. But that's the only thing that concerns me, really. However, if you get into something that you're really interested in, then that does disappear.
Yeah, that stuff goes away.
But you really have to, and it is not. It's not that hard to get into it once you've found something you can get into, But you have to find the thing.
Right, and before that, it's pretty scary.
Yeah, it really is, and it makes you not want to write.
My grandfather used to call it the first olive out of the jar is the hardest.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's very good to have a collaborator. I don't understand playwrights. I don't understand how Jonathan sits down all by himself and forgive the vulgarity, gets it up, and enough so over a period of time, he actually ends up with a play. We have people to nudge us. Well, you don't when you do a song cycle. That's different. But when you're doing a show, you've either got Craig Lucas to argue with or whoever it is.
Yes.
And I do not understand how playwrights do it. When you have a playwright who really knows the people he's created, that's all you need. That's that constant stimulus. I could never write anything by myself.
Would you ever keep a list of things that you used to know, that you used to observe, that you may have forgotten, that you might refer back? Oh gosh, of course, there's that.
No, I think you do file it in your memory. But do you actually jot things down?
I don't have a list, but I often realize that my biggest problem is that I forgot something I used to know, and when I remember it, I fix the thing.
Give me an example. What do you mean?
Well, something basic like we have to know what this person wants.
Ah.
And I'd be writing away associatively, thinking it's really terrific and ornate and delicious harmonically, and then it has nowhere to go and doesn't go anywhere and dies.
And then you realize.
Oh, well, we don't know what that person wants.
Well, it's interesting because I never attack a song without asking those questions first. That's what I mean by talking to the librettist.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to know exactly what each scene is about. And I've said with, I think, some truth, that by the time a show goes in rehearsal, I know the script better than the librettist does, because I've literally examined every single word and why that character says that word. And if I don't know why, I call him and say, why does she say cat when she owns dogs? And he will either have an explanation or not.
And is that because without that, you can't compress it into song? You can't create metaphor?
Well, it's if you're an actor, it's exactly, come on. When you write a lyric, you're acting. You're becoming an actor. And a good actor wants to know every reason for every author's intention and then do what he or she wants to do with it. But you got to know, why is that line there? Why do we skip that line? Why can't we go from there to there? And the playwright will say, because she needs this transition in thought, or blah, 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 whatever it is. Or maybe he won't, in which case you don't do the line.
Yeah.
The same thing is true with creating characters, with interpreting the characters that the librettist has created. You got to know what each moment is, and once you do, then it becomes easier. It becomes possible to write the song. But you're describing a situation where you didn't discuss it thoroughly enough, and you've put all that effort into this song,
Yes.
and like I did with Crinoline, and find out it's entirely wrong. There's nothing wrong about writing a bad song. There's something wrong about writing a wrong song. You mustn't waste your time writing a wrong song. It's okay to waste your time writing a bad song.
I don't
We
know
all
if
do
that aphorism's going to catch on, but I...
no, but it's okay. It's okay
Yeah.
to write a bad song.
Yeah, right.
But it's not okay to write a wrong song. Oh, by okay, I mean you've wasted your time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you write a really good wrong song.
These basic fundamental things, did they constitute most of what you end up teaching when you teach?
Yeah. All those. I have a mantra, which that consists of three principles, which is content dictates form and style, less is more, and God is in the details. And I think if you pay attention to those three, you can't write bad. That's all you have to. It's so simple. I've often said, you can teach lyric writing in 5 minutes. Just stick to those. They're just hard to stick to. That's all. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know. And economy is, clarity is, above all, clarity is what it's about. It's clarity of diction, clarity of, the words have got to sit on the music in such a way. That's right. And clarity of thought. Make very clear to the audience. Can have mystery to it, but make very clear to the audience what you mean. And be sure that the character, that the performer can, particularly when straitjacketed by music, can get the words out so that only need one listening and you get exactly
who they are and what they
That's
mean.
very hard to do, but if you do it, you can't write bad.
Now, on a musical level, do you have the equivalent three tenets?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I believe in utilizing. I got it from studying with Milton Babbitt. What we did was he was a songwriter manqué, or is, I should say. And so for the first hour of our 4-hour sessions once a week, we would discuss and analyze De Silva, Brown, and Henderson, who were his favorites, and your grandpop, and particularly Jerome Kern. I mean, I can still give the lecture on All the Things You Are, and how that is a unique musical composition, and what makes it work.
Circle of Fifths.
The circle, but also the tritone circle. He breaks it to go to a new key, but it's also the tritone that defines the old key. Also, it never hits the tonic chord until the end. I mean, on and on. It's just great. But we analyzed a Bach fugue, and I think it was his term. I would like to think I made it up, but I think he made it up. He said, you see, he takes these 4 notes, referring to Bach, and he builds a cathedral out of them. And I had always appreciated Bach intellectually, but until we started analyzing what Bach was doing, it didn't get to my heart. And now I cry at Bach.
Yes.
But it goes from here to here. There's certain kinds of scores where you want to hold a score together, so it isn't just a group of disparate songs. What you do is you utilize as little material as possible and build on it, vary it. You know, Sweeney Todd is built out of about 3 or 4 themes. Not all the songs, but most of them. It's not an opera. It's not completely through composed, but a lot of it is. And Merrily Rolling is a show that exists on just that, on taking a theme and then making it the accompaniment, and taking the accompaniment, making that a theme, and making the release the main thing, and inverting and everything. It's all about manipulating things musically. And it isn't just an intellectual exercise, it gives a leanness. You have a feeling that those songs belong in that score and not in this score.
Yeah, you're not breaking any of your own rules. You create
and
this
it's not
world.
just style. It's the actual musical material, just like clay, just like marble. And
I think on a certain level, an audience sort of subcutaneously knows that.
absolutely, absolutely. I've always said they will always get it subconsciously, always.
Sunday would be another good example. I mean, I think it's very tightly.
Sunday is built on that opening arpeggio.
Yeah.
The opening arpeggio implies two major chords, a 1 and a 4, and everything after that, not everything, but most things are built. And then there's the little dot, 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 the painting theme. Then things are built out of that. And then, Move On is a culmination of all the themes playing together at once.
Yeah.
And of course the audience doesn't get that, but I do know that one of the reasons that moment is moving is that you feel the entire evening has been building to this moment. And when the themes come together, so do the hero and heroine. And that's the way you put it.
Sunday has some very stark examples of the fruit that can be born of really prolonging tension and release. You have, just in the song Sunday, there's that delicious harmony on the word park. That's just, what a shoulder chord.
Now, what does a shoulder chord mean? Oh, really? That's a nice term. That's a nice term. Yeah, no, it's harmonically. Well, of course, Sunday is my Britten influence. Most of the shows I write are my Rachmaninoff and Ravel influences, but Sunday's my Britten influence. And boy, you listen to some Britten music, I'm going to cry now. He kills me.
Have you had anything that you would consider to be a bona fide flop?
Well, a bona fide flop on an artistic and commercial level, only one, which was Pace, Your Grandfather, Do I Hear a Waltz? And for a very simple reason. It was a show that didn't need to be written. It was, when Oscar was dying, he said, Dick is going to be very lonely when I'm dead. I know you want to write your own music, but I wish you would consider writing. I said, sure, of course. And so your grandpop sent me a couple of pieces a year. And finally, he and Oscar were contemplating doing, as you may know, Time of the Cuckoo. Arthur Lawrence, who wrote the play, had asked me to introduce them he asked me to introduce him to them, and he proposed it to them. And Oscar said, "It's a good idea, but because the recent release of the movie Summertime, which was Katharine Hepburn's movie version of Time of the Cuckoo," he said, "I'd like to wait 5 years." And Arthur said, "Fine." Well, within those 5 years, Oscar died. And so that was a thing that Dick came to me with. And because with Arthur, and I liked writing with Arthur so much, I thought it would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, which is not the reason to write a show. And it's an ugly metaphor, but I've often compared the show to a dead baby. It looks like a baby and it's beautiful and all that. It just isn't alive.
Yeah.
A better image would be, it's a plane that doesn't take off. And Do I Hear Waltz is not a bad show. It's a dead show. And it's because there's no reason to write it. There's no passion
And
to
that was
write
sort of the cancer that, that was.
Oh, that was, yeah. Well, yeah, that was
everything.
That was really bad stuff on all ground. Because Arthur himself didn't realize that Arthur's motive was to make money. And, there's Dick Ryder's the most successful composer,
Right.
producer in the theater, and a play that had worked very well, and it was a good play, and easy to musicalize, quote unquote. And it was exactly why not to write a show.
And also, I think something else may have died in that 5 years, which was my grandfather's sense of who he was as a composer.
That was the discouraging and shocking thing to me, was that he felt the well had run dry.
Yeah.
I could not get him to rewrite.
I mean, you can hear that in the
I
music.
could not get him to rewrite. He would write something, and I say, look, can we just work on the release a little bit? He couldn't do it. He had to write a whole new release, if anything, but he resisted rewriting anything at all. And I realized it wasn't me, it was himself. He really was afraid that he would wake up the next morning and have no ideas. And maybe that was true or maybe not, but he had convinced himself of that.
Yeah.
And it made the collaboration, apart from the personality problems he had, or I had with him, that's what made it impossible. But that's the only show I've written that I think, because the flops, like Anyone Could Whistle, which is a show written by the two smartest kids in the class from the back row. It's just so condescending and smart-ass, and smart at the same time. That's still, I'm glad I wrote it. I have no regrets having written it at all. Only Do I Hear Waltz, I think, was a waste of my life. And it was because I, like Arthur and Dick, wrote it for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
I did it to pay Oscar's debt back, and because I wanted to work with Arthur again, and also I thought that we could make money the way Arthur did, and blah, blah, blah.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a medium to bad imitation of my grandfather's music, and nobody was. It felt sort of.
Yeah, it
wasn't.
It's
No one was
it's
having
just
fun
mediocre.
there.
But many of the scores he did with Oscar after King and I are just not very good. They're not up to anything like his best. That includes Sound of Music. There's a kind of plodding.
Emphatic.
Exactly. That and I got to get to work tomorrow morning. I got to turn out a tune. And.
Do you think that writers, and even the best writers, have a period of the ability to be organically themselves, where they really are in their signature, and almost everyone seems to leave that period at some point? That window seems to shut.
Well, I think that because of the nature of theater music, meaning popular theater music, commercial theater music as opposed to opera, that we all become superannuated. I think, because music changes every 25 years, I think every generation, everybody becomes old-fashioned. I think Dick became old-fashioned, was aware of it. I feel old-fashioned. I have no relationship to rock or pop, which is the coin of the realm. I think, I don't know I really don't know any composer for the theater, I think, who's written really good stuff after the age of 50, which is a very young age. But that's a generation. They start when they're in their 20s, and a generation later, they're 50, and suddenly you feel it. I've been able to avoid that somewhat, but that's because I don't have really a style of my own. My style is so geared to different people, but that's what happened when I worked with Lapine. Lapine infused me with something. It's possible that if your grandfather, instead of writing with an old conservative like me, had really allied himself with John Guare, it's conceivable he would have, because he changed his style so much from Hart to Hammerstein, he might very well have found a Guare style.
Again,
yeah, because God knows the talent was there, but how do you do that? How do you do that?
It takes a lot of courage.
It really does. It really does.
When you hit something that you just can't solve in a room on a show that you're feeling is going well, what do you do?
Call the collaborator. I'm sorry, there's no more interesting answer than that.
If when you're writing, you sort of lay something down and think, well, I really want to get to dinner. I really want to leave town. That's got to be. I think that's good enough. But there's that little inner voice that's sort of like, that's not good enough. Do you think that exists in everyone?
Well, it doesn't exist in me because I get dogged. I get dogged, but it's exactly like, again, solving a puzzle. It does not occur to me to break the concept unless it's an obligation. If it's something I've got to go to, then I resent it. And also, I have that thing that I'm sure a lot of people have, which is if you know you have to leave the house at 6 o'clock, you get a great idea at 5 minutes to 6.
Right.
You know, that's
It's just
perverse,
gonna have to happen.
and that happens to every writer.
Right.
But if it's not necessary, no, I stay with it until I get exhausted, or until I think I don't know what to do, and then I go to sleep. And I am a firm believer in all problems getting solved in dreams. I really believe that you wake up in the morning and it's solved, or it's on the way to solution.
After all the success that you've had, and it's probably embarrassing for you to hear it, but you are so revered and so admired, not just for what you've made, but also for how you've been to people, that you've been generous about teaching, that you've been honest, and that you have tried to be as helpful as you can be. And you've also had a lot of success on a sort of more superficial level. Has that been an evil as well as good? I mean, when you try to approach your work as all that you've done and all that people expect from you, overwhelming?
Well, the expectations come from the work, not from the teaching. Teaching to me is the sacred profession, and I cry when I talk about it. I'll probably cry now. But my life was saved by teachers. First a Latin teacher in high school, and then Oscar Hammerstein, who was a teacher, and who just before he died, gave me a portrait of himself, and I asked him to inscribe it, which is weird when you think that, you know, it's like asking your father to inscribe something. And he wrote, I'm gonna cry. He wrote, "For Stevie, my friend and teacher." And that describes Oscar better than any other way I can describe him. He understood that he as you know, in King and I, he said, "By your pupils you are taught." And then Milton Babbitt. And then my collaborators like Arthur Lawrence taught me a lot, and Bert Shevelov, and Hal Prince. So teaching to me it's a necessity. I couldn't live without it.
Well, when I played you my music for the first time when I was 14, you know, I came in all puffed up thinking I'd be rained with compliments and things. And I think it was right here, and I played you my things, and you had some very direct things to say, and I left crestfallen, of course. And you wrote me a letter that said, I didn't mean to be not very encouraging. I mean to be constructive, and that's the best form of encouragement. That was a very direct and a very kind letter, and very much in the spirit of teaching, and that's who you are to me.
Oh, well, that's nice. But you know, that's a direct reflection of that afternoon. I've told the story 5,000 times about going over to Oscar's, having written this school show, and I gave it to him because I thought he would want to produce it on Broadway, and I waited overnight, and I just knew that just like you, that when I over there, he'd say, "Steve, you're going to be the first 15-year-old to have and Dick and I are so proud to present this." And I said, "You know, treat me as if you didn't know me." He said, "Oh, in that case, it's the worst thing I ever read." But he said exactly to me what I said to you, which he said, I didn't say it wasn't talented. I said it's no good. And here, if you want to know why it's no good, I'll tell you. And he told me. Yeah, no, I just think teaching is it. And you know, it isn't that I get so stimulated by the students. It's that I just love passing on what Oscar passed on to me. Simple as that.